Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the SDN panel. Thanks for all coming out this morning. I'd like to introduce our panelists. Starting off, we have Arpit Jashpura, Vice President of Product Management and Strategy for Dell Networking.
Good morning.
Good morning. Up next, we have Steve Shaw, Senior Director of Product Management at Citrix. Would you please welcome Steve? Come on down.
Walk.
And the final member of our panel, Dominic Wild, Vice President of Product Management for HP Networking. There. Well, thank you for joining us all. We've got, of course, a lively topic, software-defined networking. And the topic this year is getting software-defined networking down to business. We've spent the last year really moving beyond what has been the hype machine of SDN and a lot of the wild projections about even what it is and where it's going. What I want to do today is actually talk about some of the examples that we're seeing that are actually doing real work in networking. The things that are starting to move beyond the wild fantasies to real practical nuts and bolts things. Things that we can really use today in terms of capabilities. So what are the pieces of where we stand today and the important components that are actually doing real work with SDN today? So Arpit, why don't you kick it off to start?
Sure. So let me tell you a story that everybody knows, right? If a grandma can program your DVR, technology has made it to the masses, right?
Right.
That's the state of SDN. Not quite, but almost there, okay? 3 years ago, we were talking about, what is SDN, using analogies to, describe, explain. A couple of years ago, we all kind of realized, well, it's there. So then came the vendor fragmentation, for lack of a better word. All of us had different ideas on how to get there. And then came all the O's, for lack of a better word, Open Compute, ONF, ODL, OCs, OMP.
I love the idea of the O's of SDN.
Yeah.
You've got a lot of them.
Right, and I'm sure I've forgotten one of the O's, right? Feels like a Oscar-winning speech, right? But, point is, we're past that, okay? And I think we have now real deployments with real customers solving real business problems and saving money, getting the agility and getting the automation that networking deserved in the first place.
Steve, so from your view,
Yeah,
what's getting traction? What's doing real work today?
So what's great is that we actually have tangible products now. And I think this is something that's really important because when we go out and we speak with a lot of folks, one of the things that we quickly find is, well, that's all right. I haven't seen it or I don't get it. And as you start pointing out what all those pieces are and saying, well, no, they're really here. Look at them. They do things that are meaningful and tangible and deliver on that promise of virtualization, of software orientation. You see a lot of lights light up and they go, oh, I get it now. I see how those pieces fit. And this is not just with the layer 2 and 3 section of the world, but it's also layer 4 through 7 parts of the world as well. So when you're talking about application delivery controllers, when you're talking about WAN optimization, all of those pieces are now starting to fit into place. The part that I think we still have a little work to go to is really around automation. Because while we have automation stacks, I don't think we're already there with the people necessary to go and make those automation stacks really hum. So that's an area where I'd like to see some development.
All right, so Dominic,
Yeah,
what things we're doing with SDN today?
well, I think that the important thing is that we've moved beyond the pieces and parts. I think that the discussion around SDN in the past couple of years has been around controllers and protocols, and now we're talking about solutions. I think that's the great news here, is that we're really talking about solutions. We're talking about what can you practically do with this. And more than that, we're demonstrating it. We have customers who are running SDN live in their networks. We have demonstrations of this. And I think the other important thing is we've moved beyond just the data center conversation. I think that the industry got a bit obsessed with SDN just being about network virtualization in the data center. And I think that to me, the huge potential for SDN is to go way beyond the data center. There are many things that we can do in terms of new security models, better business experience, better QoS, better deployment models in the branch and the campus, etc. And we're demonstrating those. We have a school running an innovative security model that actually builds the security perimeter at the edge of the network and prevents malware spreading at the edge of the network. We have a QoS application for UC&C, which enables you for the first time to have the application itself, in this case Microsoft Link, actually tell the network what it needs in terms of an SLA for a number of different endpoints participating in a collaboration session, and to be able to maintain that. So now we're actually demonstrating those things. Now we're actually making those commercially available and they're being deployed. I think that people are now starting to see the potential and now starting to realize that, hey, this is really flexible, I can do more with this, and I can really simplify how I operate the network.
Well, that brings me to an interesting point. I think, Steve, you touched on some of this. There's still that sort of a little bit of healthy skepticism out there of, all right, where is this all going? And you talked about quality of service, security isolation, a lot of these good things that we can do that are a lot of the next steps around SDN. But one of the things that we hear back from a lot of our clients is, well, quality of service, security isolation, we had the ability to do that before. If we think about the technology that we've really got today, what are we doing to step beyond that? Right. What is it that starts to bring that forward? And Dominic, you talked a little bit about the integration, the automation pieces. Mm-hmm. What are the things about what exists today that differentiate it from the capabilities that we've been working with? So
I think you're absolutely right. I mean, like anything, you can do things today. It's about doing things better and doing things differently. So I think there's two aspects. First is automation, and I know that's a subject Steve is near and dear to, but automation is a very, very important part. And being able to automate tasks that would otherwise take a lot of operational investment is a very, very important part of this. But the other important part that I think people miss is about abstraction. It's about abstracting the complexity of the network and enabling you to actually define a new control surface for the network, which is much simpler. And so, for years, if we talk about network virtualization again, for years, we've been doing network virtualization with VLANs. We all know that the engineering department is not meant to talk to the HR department. That's something we've all done. But in the sort of new models with network virtualization, for instance, what we're able to do is to be able to be topology independent, is to be able to say, look, we can deploy these with great agility. We can deploy ad hoc networks with great agility without having to reconfigure the underlying topology of the network. And that is incredibly valuable. But what we have to do is we have to recognize that we have to use the right tool at the right time. So, for instance, we can do SDN and network virtualization with VLAN technology, which means that it will work with the tool sets that we have today. But we can also use VXLAN or other technologies that are innovative and coming in, and those give much greater scale, for instance. So for those enterprises that need the greater scale, it's a perfect tool.
The word I would throw in there is malleable. This is really about introducing malleability into that layer and making it easy to transform the network based on how our applications change. And that application feedback loop becomes really crucial to really realizing that value. If I can see my apps say, I'm congested, please change something, right? And send that message to a controller, that controller go and not only change the entity itself, but all of the adjacencies around it so that whatever is actually making it saturated gets unsaturated, right? If the firewall is saturated, spinning up another firewall and so forth, that feedback loop becomes really critical.
But I want to come back to the application integration pieces, but you're confident.
So I think if we are doing it already, right, then why does it take 6 months for a workflow to go through, right? I mean, let's face it, right? SDN does have value in solving simplicity and automation, right? But here's I think what I want to say, right? There are really 3 ways to get to SDN, okay? And I think we hinted at some of these, but there is for a lack of a better word, a proprietary way, okay? Take what I have, open it up, and call it SDN. And there's movements around that path, okay? There is another way that says, hey, don't, mess around too much with the physical network, just do it in an overlay, right? And we call it NVO, and there's models like that, right? And then there's the purest approach where, I will only use a protocol, and then there's wars on that, or I will standardize based on, open source, right? And I think the fragmentation of how to get there is really one of the challenges that I think as an industry we need to address. And we believe, from my perspective, we want to give customers a choice on the path of migration, right? It's not that a protocol is better than an overlay or a proprietary is better than this, right? It's the choice. What's your network today? What's your IT today? And how do you want to migrate?
Well, and you touch on what I think is one of the issues that a lot of our audience is facing, which is how do you move forward? I think if we sort of take a look broadly at the move towards SDN capabilities, there are a lot of stumbling blocks. There are a lot of things that, certainly a lack of understanding, I think, has been one of the issues. That the haze of all of the hype that's been out there has confused what a lot of the realities are. What do each of you see as the stumbling blocks to making those steps and standing in the way of that transition?
So I see 3 stumbling blocks. The first one is organization. Will the network admin be in charge? Will the server admin be in charge, or the storage admin? And how does the CIO, from what we heard in the earlier keynote, how do you organizationally, separate but collaborate, right? So that's kind of the first stumbling block. There is, yes, a standard sort of interop stumbling block, what we call the northbound interfaces, so we still have to standardize on that a little bit. But I think a third stumbling block is if we keep on inventing new protocols just for the sake of it, we're just building better mousetraps, okay? And we're not getting to a point where the actual end goal is agility, automation, and programmability, okay? So that's, in my mind, as an industry, we have to get our heads around and solve.
But I think keying off the organizational point that you made, I think one of the challenges that customers wrestle with is how do I, even if I understand the concepts, how do I apply this to my specific environment? How do I put this in the context of my organization?
The practical.
And as important as the technologies and as important as the solutions is the help that you need, the consulting and services piece, to be able to help to map out a roadmap that is specific to this organization, because every organization is different. Every organization has different, organizational challenges and different levels of skill set and different levels of resource. And so, one of the things that we're doing is providing those services, what we call transformation workshops, to be able to help customers understand in the context of their business, where should you start? What is the small step that you can take in the first place that's easy to get a big win? Because it's really about winning the hearts and minds of the IT organization overall. Nobody wants their job to become more complex. Nobody wants to take on more work. But being able to take something on and say, look, in general, I want to get from A to B from a business perspective, and I can now understand how SDN can help me to get there from a business perspective, but these are the phases and small steps that we have to take to get there. I think that's really what people are looking for, is that practical advice, that practical experience of what is possible.
I'd further break the organizational piece down into sort of 3 key buckets. And that is, I have an existing team, a bunch of great, smart folks who have been doing this for 20 years. How do they go and transform their skill sets into something that can gear towards automation? Because if you've never been a software engineer before, suddenly going and being thrown and saying, well, go learn Python because you need an API to configure this new device is a non-starter, right? You need to go and figure out how you're going to get new people into the organization that have that skill set. Colleges don't graduate computer science / IT people. They graduate one or the other. We don't have that blending happening yet. And the third one, and this is more of a general IT issue, is just women in IT, right? We're still missing half of our workforce because we need to make sure that our STEM programs do bring women into the force and make it easy for them to at least make sure they understand and have that opportunity to come into IT and do development.
Yeah. Just one more point. I think the other thing that people struggle with is how to change the conversation at the C-level. You know, if you're an IT manager, if you're a network admin, you're already going and asking for a bunch of money. You're already saying, you know, hey, I need more investment, I need more dollars, because, you know, networking is expensive, it's too complex, it's been so for too long. So, you know, you're constantly just saying, okay, I want to expand bandwidth. But the C-level view of the world is, what do I get? I get connectivity. What's the real value that I'm getting from my network? And why isn't it getting cheaper? So being able to change the context of that conversation and being able to say, hey, if I invest in these new technologies that enable my network to be dynamic and responsive versus static and complex, I now have the ability to create new lines of revenue. I can now help the business and the organization to apply business policy directly to the network and use it as a tool to differentiate the overall business. That is a big change in the conversation. So that's, you know, that's another aspect that we need to address.
Is that a conversation that depends upon organizational maturity? I think one of the things that a lot of that we all face is the organization's ability to be able to make those steps. I mean, we look at broad market statistics, we're seeing about 2/3 of the market has gotten to virtualization. There's barely another fifth that have made it to some level of automation and orchestration. Is that a step that they've got to get to first to either understand what the value is? You talk about the conversations with the CIO. Yeah. Is that an organizational thing, or is that basically in
So
technology?
let's do one quick thing, if you don't mind. Takes 2 seconds. How many of you in the audience are network admins? Raise of hands. Okay. Keep it up if you are. You can also program. That's the point, right? See, I think what we brought up is this is the future of organizational training, right? Because the server admins do these scripting and the Unix and or Linux and Perl Python and all these programming languages, right? And you need network to be programmed, not provisioned, right? I mean, that's the fundamental change that will happen in the next 5 years. It is about programmability and not provisioning.
So Steve was talking about bringing new people into the organization. Is this a skills transition for existing networking teams? Is this an evolution?
It's both, right? We're going to have the size in the existing organization just is not going to transform overnight. And we need the existing smart folks who understand and have built these networks. They understand it's not just about the technology, but it's about the business processes that drove them. And if we don't bring that knowledge around with it, what we're going to have is a bunch of programmers. It's great, but programmers who don't understand the business processes that drove IT in the first place is a huge gap.
Well, and networking specifics underneath that.
Absolutely,
yeah,
absolutely.
But I think this is, you know, this is part of the problem of why we are where we're at with SDN is you know, what we're saying on this panel is, you know, oh, okay, all of a sudden you've all got to become programmers overnight. That is not true. This is the point of SDN, is that there are a number of enterprises who will want to programmatically go in and create their own applications and code to northbound APIs on controllers, etc., and get deep in the details. And that's great. The facility is there to do that. Those are probably big organizations that can afford to hire those skill set. But the majority of enterprises, you know, we're scaring them. The reality is we are creating turnkey SDN solutions that are simplifying the control service. You don't need any programming skills at all. What we're doing is creating applications, and we've created an ecosystem. I mean, HP has an ecosystem with, you know, currently more than 35 partners. You know, Citrix is one of those. 35 partners in there who are developing turnkey solutions that will enable you to deploy those applications, those SDN applications that give you those dynamic capabilities without needing those programming skills. And I think this is the fallacy that we have to start moving away from is it's, you know, you don't need to be a programmer. We're actually trying to simplify things for you. We're actually trying to abstract the complexity of the network, bring you all the benefits of more agility, of more, you know, dynamic capabilities, better TCO models, you know, all of those things, but doing it in a way that says, look, instead of having this, you know, all this human middleware programming CLIs and doing scripting and having to, you know, now understand programming models, actually we're removing all that and we're creating a paradigm that says I can take the business policy that I already actually have today and apply that directly to the network without having to have a layer of middleware.
Yeah, this gets back to Steve's point about application integration.
This is really, we're we're trying to tease apart these two different situations, right? One is about creating APIs for interacting with partner companies, which is what we all do. And we do that to make it easy for these turnkey systems to exist. So for example, with my product line, I can come in and I can apply application intelligence to the network. So I can actually see what's happening at the app tier, not just at the network tier, and send that intelligence to the rest of the network. And that makes life a lot easier for everybody who can benefit from that app intelligence tier. That second half of it, though, is saying, why do I want a more malleable network, right? If I want a more malleable network, if I want to be able to go and make it easier to do a rollout, then that programming skill does come into play. Because if I take a simple example, I have to go and achieve PCI compliance for a bunch of applications. And the old way was you go rack and stack a bunch of hardware, you're going to go and change all of your routing configurations for each application, a lot of complexity, a lot of opportunity for mistakes, and then we take months and months and months with many headcount to do it. And in a programmable world, where we would take that is to say, well, I'm going to write a script, I'm going to instantiate the devices I need for, say, an app firewall for PCI compliance, pull that all in, and I'm going to have the script developed in a week, tested in a week, and rolled out in a week, which is a night and day difference when you're talking about dollars and cents on how many people it takes to make something work.
Hey, listen, right? Imagine a world where you're managing a switch like a server, okay? We've had disaggregation happen in the PC world. We've had disaggregation happen in the mainframe world with x86. And as Dell, we're the first to announce disaggregation on the networking world, where now a switch has a choice of an OS, which can be managed using Linux type tools, best of breed applications, programming or not programming, it's up to the admins to do that, right? And all of a sudden, customers have choice with a tremendous OpEx savings, right? I mean, we've had customers who are in training, right, in the globe around the world that use SDN to save, up to 40% TCO, 90% ports. There's a lot of examples now in the world, okay? And I think at the end of the day, an IT admin needs to feel that the IT infrastructure and what we call, the whole software-defined enterprise, which is really the macro view of end-to-end enterprise, all the way from campus to the clients, to the data center, to the remote office, branch office, it's all software-defined.
But again, I would say, this is where we're confusing people. Disaggregation of an operating system from a switch is not SDN. That's disaggregation. That's a different thing. That's a different topic. It's not SDN. Sure, there's maybe some relations there in much as you're going to put SDN on those switches. But we as an industry tend to confuse all of this mishmash of things that are going on in the industry and try and tag it as SDN. It isn't.
And that is what happened 2 years ago when we had the proprietary option, we had the overlay option, and when we had the purist option. So I think what's happening is it achieves the goal of programmability and automation in a very consistent manner, right? It achieves the goal, right? I mean, we have companies announcing, NICs and things as SDN. So, again, ignore the press and the hype. The reality is networks are getting more automated, they're getting more programmed and simpler, and they will not be a stumbling block for the IT admins to drive future workloads. I think that's how I see it.
So to make those next steps to actually getting SDN to deliver real business value, a quick summary of next steps of our audience when they're leaving here, where should they be headed next? So Arpit, why don't we start with you?
Well, they should definitely visit, the show floor. I mean, I have to put that plug. But more importantly, I think they need to be looking out for the path they want to choose to get to what they want to do, right, in terms of SDN, the 3 paths I described. And seriously look at the organizational alignment in terms of who is really in power in making the decisions of where and how networks get automated.
So I definitely think that this is really fundamentally about software orientation, right? You pick whatever word we want to use. It's about making it all software and highly malleable. And when you look at that software orientation, those 2 halves that I mentioned earlier, there's looking at what are the integrations, looking at who's partnering with whom, what does that ecosystem look like, if you choose something, are you going to get the integrations you need? And then simultaneously looking at, well, if I need to go and automate some of this because my team is capable of it, or I do want to attain that value, that is my why, I want to get that value, then how do I go and address my organizational requirements to hit that goal?
So my advice would be don't try and boil the ocean with 5,000 space heaters on the beach. Start small. Look at what are the big operational issues that you have today that are just day-to-day annoyances, that are things where you're spending a lot of resource and a lot of time, that you just feel like if I could free up that resource, if I could automate that, something, if I'm trying to put network taps on, for instance, and I have to do a truck roll to the data center to do that, or I'm spending a lot of time dealing with malware at the edge of my network, and wouldn't I love it if I had IPS capability right at the edge? If I have bad user experiences on UC and C applications because and I'm getting lots and lots of calls on that. Start small, start with something specific, and then come to vendors like ourselves and our partner community and say, what can you do to help me with this specific problem? And let us help you to understand that, and let us give you the advice and the services and everything that help you to understand what are the small practical steps you can take first.
All right. Well, thank you, gentlemen. I'd like to have you join me in thanking our panelists here. Thank you for the insight.
Thank you.
All right.